The best analogy that I've used, and even with this school district, was that train, that AI train, has left the station. It has left the station. It is already on its way. I do not know where that train is going. A lot of people on that train don't know where it's going either.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, Jorge Valenzuela.
This is education coach Jorge Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it. We're here today with my very good friend, Stevie Frank. Stevie is an education consultant, speaker, and coach. She's very knowledgeable, so I'm happy to have her on the show. How are you?
I'm doing so well. How are you?
I'm happy to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. I have swooned over you, I have to say, on X, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and seen all of the spaces and places that you've been at. So I was just excited to get an in-person meeting with you, even at ISTE. So that's one of the beauties of going to conferences like that, is to be able to see the people that you admire and look up to and admire their work. And so it was so great to be able to see you.
Stevie, right back at you. For the audience, I have seen Stevie online posting about her work for a few years. And like she mentioned, one day at ISTE 24 this past summer, before one of my sessions, she walked up to me and introduced herself. And now we're friends. Much respect to you as well.
Thank you.
Stevie, to give us your backstory, how did you get into education and what steps did you take to get where you are now as an education coach, speaker, and consultant?
I am, if anybody has any trauma-based informed practices, I am actually an ACE 8. And so for those of us that don't know about trauma-based informed practices or ACE scores, so there are about 10 childhood traumas that a kid can go through in order to be able, that have a significant effect and impact on their health and well-being and ability to learn. And I have 8 of those. And so just kind of knowing that, I know that's always a surprise for people, because a lot of times you don't know what people and students are going through in their everyday. And so that really helped me to create empathy for my students. Now, when I was a student myself, my way to escape all of that was through school. School seemed normal. I had a routine. I had some great teachers along the way that really believed in me and that, saw something in me, and I worked hard. And I think that was just the start of it, where I was always a hard worker, because I was always like, how can I get out of this environment that I was in and rise above? So this started very young for me. Since education was kind of my way out, I wanted to be able to give back to other students. And I actually went back and taught in the district that I was at. So we're talking like 80% free and reduced lunches, 80 to 90%. I worked in that for about eight years or so before I finally was like, okay, I need it. It's a lot. Those of us that are working in, districts that are quote unquote failing according to their state, there's a lot that goes into the work. And so I was thinking about starting a family, and I was like, I need to get somewhere that is giving back to me as well and not taking so much. And so that's when I started to kind of jump around different school districts until I've now landed in Zionsville Community Schools, and I love it. So Zionsville is the perfect space for me. It's a great place to raise my family as well. So it checks a lot of those boxes for me. How did I become a consultant? It's so funny, because it was honestly through this organic thing where I just all of a sudden started to see I wanted more, and I wanted to create better experiences. And if I ever master something, I always pivot and say, okay, what's next? Because I'll stop doing that. I taught 4th grade for 7 years before I went to my principal and was like, I can do this in my sleep. Can you give me a different grade? I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to be challenged. So yeah, it just kind of came up from that, where I was sharing my experiences, because I had learned so much from my professional learning network through Twitter and X, through attending webinars, through listening to podcasts like yours. And so it was kind of my small way to be able to give back to the community. Once I started doing that, people started asking me questions and started looking to what I was doing as a inspiration to them. And that always gives back so much when I can see somebody using something that I've either trained them on or something that I have chatted with them or shared. And that's just kind of where the consulting started to come into play.
For all my administrators, all my district and school administrators, this is the type of person you want to hire. I love the humility and expertise at the same time. Sometimes you get people that appear very knowledgeable, but the humility isn't there.
Yeah.
And I love that about you. That resonated in person, and it's shining through right now through the camera.
Oh, well, thank you. I could not do what I do without the support of my community and Professional Learning Network. So thanks for being able to see that. That's awesome.
Either as a teacher or consultant, what is something that was holding you back, and how did you overcome it?
I struggled with not knowing enough. And I know that sounds funny, but here's what I mean. I turned to, it was then Twitter, X, to say, okay, how can I do this better? How can I teach this lesson better? How can I impact learners better? How can I engage them? How can I motivate them? And I was given one-to-one devices for 5th grade. And I was like, what can I do with these things that make it more meaningful for students and translates into their everyday? So what I did was I turned to my Professional Learning Network. I started to follow very closely with people that I admired in things that they were doing. And so I started listening to their webinars or their podcasts. And I started to really just kind of be a sponge to all of that. And then from there, then I was able to see and learn different ways of how to teach. I was also then able to ask that question to say, okay, well, if they're doing this, then maybe I can do this too. And it was honestly, I will never forget, it was a session with Ken Shelton and Kersey, as she's known in Twitter X world. And they were talking about how to network and what that looks like. And I remember Ken saying, you need to put it out there. Like if you're taking from Twitter and X and you're learning from other people, then you need to be putting out content too, so that others can see what you're doing. That to me is a place, and that's where I grew in both the professional settings of a teacher and then also a consultant.
Big shout out to Ken Shelton. Sir,
Yeah.
when are you coming on the show? Just asking.
Oh my gosh, I would love that.
If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
Education is changing. Classrooms look different, and the future demands that our students be equipped for whatever comes their way. Educators play a huge role in helping prepare students for their futures. Defined Learning is a K-12 standards-aligned PBL solution that provides high-quality cross-curricular performance tasks across content areas such as ELA, math, science, social studies, computer science, and more. The hands-on projects are based on real-world situations and allow students to apply their learning. Education is changing. Give students the tools and experiences to recognize their futures and make an incredible impact on the world. Defined, the authority on applied learning.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that is easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience, so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider Lifelong Learning Defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have him come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
I move around a lot of schools, and we're seeing a huge disconnect. A lot of teachers that have come from non-traditional pathways, especially in the past few years. And so just interactions, expectations is really the first step. All of my teachers, raise your right hand and please repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my students. All of my administrators, all my directors, all my principals, all my coordinators, raise your hands, please, your right hand, and repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my faculty and staff. Thank you. You're doing a lot of work around the use of artificial intelligence in education. I met a teacher last week who refused to use AI in our workshop. We were planning lessons and she told me her son told her, if we keep using AI, the AI is going to take over. Stevie, for educators on the fence about using AI in their work, how would you break it down for them?
I first want to lead into this conversation with everybody's on their own journey. Like I talked about at the beginning, we never know where people are coming from with their experiences, and experiences are going to explain reality for a lot of people. And so maybe they had a different experience with something, and that would be my question to dig a little bit deeper into. I like asking hard questions and digging questions.
She didn't want to use something new. She did not want to use something new. That's what it was.
New is kind of hard. New is kind of hard for some people.
So it's so funny. She was asking me questions.
Yeah.
And I was on my laptop and I'm going to Microsoft Copilot. I'm copying and pasting it and emailing it to her. And she said, I know what you did and I'm going to use it because you sent it to me, but I'm not going to use it on my own because it's going to take over.
So she likes the output.
Yeah. I never heard that before. I just think she was uncomfortable.
I understand. And that's something, if you've had any practice with trauma-based informed practices, there are some people that any newness or anything like that becomes uncomfortable for them. So sometimes you have to meet them where they're at. The best analogy that I've had when I've led different trainings, because I've led trainings in different school districts on AI that have it completely turned off for both staff and students. And I'm like, I don't know why I'm leading this training right now, but here we are, because you're wanting to start the conversation, but everything's turned off. Everybody's along in their own journey. Now, again, the best analogy that I've used, and even with this school district, was that train, that AI train, has left the station. Okay. It has left the station. It is already on its way. And nobody, well, I don't want to speak for everybody. I'm going to use I statements here. I do not know where that train is going. A lot of people on that train don't know where it's going either. Is it heading towards, where is it going to be next? Where are you going to start seeing it? And where are you going to start expecting it? All of those are different conversations. However, if you are not on the train and it is just moving further and further away from you, you are going to be further and further behind. I think sometimes people like connections as well. Like that would be me like saying, I'm not going to use this thing called the internet. It's new, it's scary, it's going to take over the world. And that Hyper-Gartner cycle of showing how exciting something gets and then people freak out about it and then they finally feel okay with it, that is very real and near. And the thing is still here. It is not going away anytime soon. And that expectation of people using it, I think, is going to start really getting there. And I, as a classroom teacher, started to already kind of rely on it and even rely on my students using it. Meaning, when I was a humanities teacher, and so I had a lot of writing. And when I see essays come through, and I see that red little squiggle underneath a word, and I'm like, really? But I'm like, it's underlined in red. It's telling you that it's spelled wrong. Why didn't you fix it? And they were like, oh, okay. I was already, as a teacher, expecting my students to use a form of artificial intelligence to better what they were doing.
Spell check, Grammarly for folks that may not know.
It is a subset of AI. It is not generative AI. So I know there's a difference, but that's just an example of how I, as a classroom teacher, already started to expect my students to use predictive text, those sorts of things. I think once people start to realize artificial intelligence was already living in a world around them and they've already kind of started to accept it, then they're like, okay, maybe it's not this big, scary thing. I also think knowledge is power. So I always start with, how does a large language model work? What is this thing that's going on? I never use the word magic, right? It's not this magic that happens. It's a good guess into what it looks like. I think knowledge also helps people understand what it is instead of just being this mysterious thing in the background.
Stevie, what is the primary message of your coaching work with educators on artificial intelligence?
There's a lot that can go with it, but I would have to say the equity piece for me. I've seen it close down in certain districts where I'm thinking about the population that it serves. And so already thinking about specific students, and that already might be in a marginalized, component, where are they really going to already be behind, because statistics say they are going to be behind. If you're turning it off in those types of districts, you're putting those students further and further behind.
I've even seen it turned off in affluent districts, which I found strange. Yeah, that too.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is because the kids are going to use it. Regardless. Like, you can turn it off, but like that doesn't stop the kid picking up their phone, right? That doesn't stop them using it on their own personal devices. And the kids that have the data plans, that have the computers at home, that have the parents that maybe in jobs where they're utilizing artificial intelligence, those students will be fine because they're learning how to use it. But those students that maybe don't have those luxuries in life, they're not going to have that. I was just leading a training with realtors and title companies on what artificial intelligence is and how to use it to increase productivity. That's the norm, right? Because people are saying we need to be doing the thing. So how do we do the thing? That takes training. And that's almost like saying, I'm not going to teach my students how to do a Google search and then expect them to be able to do it well. So yeah, that's my clap back to that one. The train is leaving.
I think it definitely left. I don't know if you've ever been on my Instagram, but my Instagram looks beautiful. It's like 4 or 5 AI tools that have made that possible.
That's a good point.
Now for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. You know George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to like communicate better and even like deal with social emotional stuff. Like they're having a bad day, a SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
Please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with SmartLab. Stevie, tell us about any upcoming projects, such as a new book or conferences you'll be speaking at.
I love reading books, and I'm always reading something. The newest book that I'm reading now that's top of mind since we were talking about, Ken and Dee, was definitely their The Perils of AI in Education. That's a great book. I just recently was listed as a Keep Indiana Learning coach. Keep Indiana Learning is part of the Department of Education here in Indiana, where they provide professional development for teachers, and it's just kind of an initiative that they really kind of foster to get good PD out there. So within that, I know that there is an election that is coming up, and I am going to be talking about the use of News Literacy Project has a great module resource that's called Checkology. And so I'm going to be sharing about how teachers can use Checkology with students in order to get them to critically think about what news they are receiving, what media they are receiving. And for those scrollers that think everything on TikTok is real and is fact, maybe giving them a pause to say, should I fact check that? Should I laterally read what's going on? And our students don't know those skills. So I've been in a class where they're like, well, I heard on TikTok and it looked real. And with AI, it really can look real. So really teaching them those skills. And again, especially in the era of like, we're just about to get started in this election. Last election, it really showed how important it was to be a good fact checker. And I think those skills need to be really poured into our students because, and I'm taking a thing from, or as quote, if you will, from Newslet Project, democracy is at stake if we're not fact checking and ensuring that we're making informed decisions. That's my big project right now. I'll be at conferences. You can follow me on Twitter to find out about those. But that's my big one that I'm just kind of wrapping my mind around right now.
I love what you said about fact checking. I recently saw D.L. Hughley at the DNC, and he apologized. He apologized for not fact checking in the past.
Wow.
Folks out there that don't fact check, just think about what I said. What a perfect way to end this show. Stevie, how can people find you so they can book you to speak at their conference, school, or event?
Well, you can find me on Twitter or X at Stevie Frank 23. I am also on LinkedIn at Stevie Frank, I believe. For right now, I'm the only Stevie Frank that I've seen out there. And then I also have a website, which is steviefrank.com. And I have a list of all of the different communications that I have for you to be able to communicate to me, all of the different types of trainings that I've led on, or just anything that you need. I really enjoy working with educators and working with administrators and trying to figure out ways to implement technology in meaningful ways. So I would love to share any of that information with anybody here listening.
That's it for this episode. Until next time, this is the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast. Whether you're a teacher or administrator, you lead by walking alongside your students and your staff. You teach them what to do, you model for them. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know what to do and you bring in a coach or a resource, you learn alongside them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing is this. Give your people feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether physically or verbally, they're going to do it right back immediately. And if they're intimidated by our position, our status, they're going to do it behind our backs and ruin our programs. My guy. I want to leave you on this note. Trajectories can be changed. When I was in 10th grade, here's a snapshot of who I was in 10th grade. There's a rapper named Rakim. I'm not sure if you guys know about Rakim, but he used to say, it's not where you're from, it's where you at. And I played that on my headphones at 16 years old every day until I believed it. And I'm showing you this because I'm seeing versions of this throughout American schools. This is your reality of what you have to face. If I can do it, any kid can do it, but they have to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with Jorge Valenzuela.